So today, Filip, Hric, and we're covering playwright and production, right? It's not all going to be about AI. There's definitely going to be some sprinkles in there for sure. And in case you haven't met us before, my name is John Canales. I'm a staff solutions engineer here at Checkly. And I'm joined today by my colleague and my friend, Filip Hric. Filip.
We're colleagues. It seems like I work at Checkly. Not yet, but we'll see what happens in the future. But we're pretty much working together every week and every month. Yeah, my name is Filip. I'm DevRel consultant, educator, and you can find all the things that I do scanning that QR code. It will put you to the page where all my links are, social media and my website. And I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. So just at a very high level, what we'll be covering today, right? We're going to be looking at creating knowledge bases for you, the team, and the AI that you're working with. Filip's actually going to be automating an uncommon workflow. I think he might try to buy a car today during the webinar, which is pretty wild.
We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
No promises. And then we'll also be talking about how you can do some validation and monitoring with Playwright and, of course, Checkly. So with that being said, let's get into it. We've got 3 different use cases to cover. They're all different and related. So let's dive right into it, right? So first and foremost, I think most of us probably know that Playwright is an automation solution. And so today during the webinar, we really want to highlight that, right? And something that I commonly run into because, I'm using Void, which is an AI assisted IDE, is that sometimes when you're talking to a locally hosted LLM and you're trying to get it to help you write some code, it just makes things up. And it's not a very good experience. I think, Filip, you've had this experience as well.
Oh yeah, and I love the confidence with which AI is able to give you incorrect answers. And I think like we all have had this experience, definitely in the early stages of like chatting with ChatGPT, etc., where those situations just make you throw your hands in the air and say like, "This is stupid. This doesn't have a future. I'm bailing. I don't care anymore." But one way or another, as I said at the very beginning of this recording, AI is going to find you.
Oh, wow, that sounds menacing. But
That sounds
let's
dark, yeah.
let's look at this together before Skynet gets Philip for saying that. Um, so what we're looking at right now are just some considerations around data extraction, right? Uh, Number one, you have to understand your data source. You got to choose the right tools. Today, we're going to be looking at both publicly hosted docs pages for some of our favorite solutions, as well as GitHub repositories. And we're going to see how we can leverage Playwright to really just give us the sort of information that we need so that our team knows the latest and greatest about these solutions. And the AI that we work with also knows the latest and greatest and can feed that back to us, right? We want to optimize for efficiency and practicality. So we want to make sure that as we adopt a solution and we're doing some data extraction, that we're doing it in a way that is efficient, right? We want to make sure that, hey, this script doesn't take 5 hours to run. If we're going to be doing this in CI/CD or using a cron job, et cetera, we want to be smart about the rate limits that we may hit, right? You don't want to hit a page every single day or,
Yeah.
30, like every minute 30 times, like you're gonna time out. It's gonna be a little rough, right? And we want to do things like be mindful of legal and ethical considerations as well. So while today Filip and I are going to be showing you some interesting cool things, you have to make sure to look at the robot.txt file or have your AI look at it when you're doing some scraping, etc. And you also have to be mindful of what sort of resources you'll be using when doing some data extraction. Filip, anything to add here before we show the code?
Nothing to add here really. I'm excited about the code.
Awesome. Awesome. So with that being said, let's get into it, right? Let me get out of here real fast. We're gonna look at some code together. Um, So first and foremost, I'm going to explain what we're looking at super quickly here. This is the Void IDE I was telling you about. It's an open source solution. It's an alternative to Cursor. As you can see here, you can talk to it. Just for funsies, let's do something like, hey, oh, not all caps, don't want it to be mad at me. What's the best way
Nice.
to get started with Checkly? Uh, I want to start a new project, right? So Checkly, for people that are on the call, likely you're here because you already know what Checkly is. It's a synthetic monitoring solution. We created our own category, et cetera. It's really interesting. It's cutting edge, but it's pretty new, right, in the grand scheme of software development. So we're going to let that run over here on the right. We're using a DeepSeek model. So we'll see what comes back. But we'll actually be looking at, because we already know what's going to happen, right? AI is going to hallucinate. It's just going to say, right now we're looking at it thinking about what to tell me, and it's just going to make something up. I already know it's going to make something up because I've done this a few times before, right? So here it's just going to keep thinking. While it's thinking, we're going to look at some code together. And this is about as simple of a way of scraping a site or a page as you can possibly get, right? So here we have just a go-to. We're going to the CLI page within the Checkly docs. And I guess we can look at that super quickly, right? Just kind of see what we're working with here. Of course, now my internet's being a little weird. Yeah, one moment. Boop, boop. Okay. Sound effects are very necessary when your internet's struggling. But here you go, right? This is the page that we're looking at. Really, for myself and for my team and for the AI that I'm working with, I just want us to know what's the best way of getting started with Checkly. If someone in my team starts leveraging Checkly, what basics do they need to know? Philip, I think earlier today we were looking at how to get started with Checkly and you asked some questions. And I think
Yep.
this type of solution could be really useful. So we're just scraping this page, right?
Yeah, so in the setup that you're describing, we would be colleagues in a company that uses Checkly, and we have some sort of internal AI, although here you're using DeepSeek, but it doesn't know about Checkly. So the goal is, as far as I understand, to feed the documentation, the live documentation from Checkly into the sort of a knowledge base of DeepSeek or of the local AI or whatever you're using, and give it that context so it can give you proper answer and don't hallucinate and imagine stuff.
Exactly. And so, to your point, right? And thanks for kind of outlining what the goal is here. Just over here on the right-hand side, we can see that in the initial shell script that Void is offering, it says npm install checkly-cli. This actually wouldn't do anything for me at all, right? Because that's not the npm package. So this already would have gotten very wrong. So
You
let's
could
run
you
this
could
test.
try, and see what. No, we don't have time for that.
We don't have time for that, sadly. Okay, so we just ran this test, right? And it ran super fast, which is nice. But let's see what we get back, right? Again, we had the most lowbrow approach to doing some data extraction here. But what we see is just all these terms that are just showing up, right?
Yeah,
And now, okay, cool. This seems kind of usable here. But Philip, what
it
are your
seems like
thoughts on what we're looking at?
there's like a lot of unnecessary text, right? To me, and I guess we can confirm that by looking at a script, is we're kind of grabbing everything that's on the page, right? And
100%.
that, I guess, when the goal is try to feed additional information into our LLM or whatever, then it's probably just adding a little bit more noise than we need, and might not end up getting what we really want.
Absolutely. So if we look back here, right, all of those all of those terms that we saw
Oh yeah,
populating the page are actually just these links to other subcategories or areas where we can learn more about Checkly. So you're completely right. We grabbed everything. So
Yeah.
there's something there's something we could do here. Sorry, I go to VS Code just out of out of force of habit here. There's something we could do here, right? We could really refine what element that we're pointing at, and we can try to be more efficient in scraping. And I've actually done that a few times. And this is actually part of a recipe that OpenAI offered maybe like a year ago from their site. But I decided to go a bit different of a route this time because for any of the solutions that I'm leveraging on a regular basis, the GitHub docs are always publicly available, right? And so the same is for Checkly, the same is for Playwright, CoreLogic, Grafana, etc. And if we go here, we start really picking up on.
Jonathan, share your screen.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen.
You're not? I can see your screen.
You're good.
Okay, cool. Thanks. But we start seeing something here, right? And there's Tim, one our founder of Checkly. And so we start seeing a pattern here. Okay, so within this subdirectory, we have all of these different markdown files. If I go to a markdown file and I click raw, wow, this is really easy to read,
Yep.
right? So if it's possible, why wouldn't I just use this to create my knowledge base with Playwright? So that's exactly what I did. And so now if I come here and we look at this script that we wrote, right, there are some directories that I'm interested in learning about, and I want the most up-to-date information for, my team and for AI to reference. And that's a CLI, that's testing. I could point it at other things. I have an output directory of knowledge base. I'm setting a timeout because I don't want this job to run forever, especially if it's running in CI or in cron job, et cetera. Again, I'm visiting that page, right? Super simple. I'm creating file links by finding the A elements that are associated with these markdown files. And then essentially I'm just confirming that they're unique because the way that GitHub has actually created these pages that the links actually duplicate. So making sure to control for that in some way. And then essentially we're just writing that content, right? So for each one of those pages, we go, we wait for the selector for that raw button we clicked earlier, right? We make sure that it shows up, we click it, we wait for a timeout for funsies. And then there is only one element that I actually care about on that page. And it has this locator of pre. And so if that's there, I'm just grabbing all the text content. So let's see really fast what happens when we run this new approach. All right, so we see right now through some console logging what's happening here, right? So we're processing these files. Philip,
Nice.
any thoughts here around whether or not this is a useful practice
Yeah.
and if this is something you'd use?
Yeah, I think that's a tester in me would like ask whether it is necessary to go through UI and find that raw file, and instead not just go directly to the link and grab it there. But I'm pretty sure you have a really good answer for that.
Yeah, I think right now my really good answer is that likely there's an API exposed somewhere that I'm not super familiar with. If these are all publicly hosted projects, right? This is the easiest way that I know how.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, I wrote most of, all these 3 clicks, right? I wrote this test just using Playwright CodeGen, right?
Yeah.
So this was the easiest way for me to start getting the sort of content that I really care about. And let's look at the difference here. We'll go to the NPM package.
I guess there's also additional advantage of whenever. So you're now working with Checkly docs, but if you were to try to scrape some other docs that are also available on GitHub, and they'll add a new page or update a page,
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about that, right? You don't have to worry about finding all the pages, because if you just like click through GitHub as a normal user would, or someone interested in that code base would, then you get that information just by navigating to that raw page.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, in addition to that, I think you're making a really great point, right? Like, hey, to some degree, what you've written here is also brittle, right?
Mhm.
Maybe the naming convention for some of, or how can I say, not just the naming convention, but the approach for how the docs are set up, you know, aren't straightforward, right? So you're going to have to find a pattern that matches that to some degree. But
Yeah.
here's that installation file, right? That says how to start. Now we can ask that same question again and say, I'm starting a new Checkly project. What's the best way to get started? Right now, what we're doing here is that we're actually referencing that file that we just wrote. And it's super straightforward, right? It's literally explaining exactly what I need to get started and what commands are available. Now, all of a sudden, I can still go to the docs. I should absolutely still read the docs, right? I should absolutely still do the things that I need to do. But all of a sudden, if you just started working with Checkly and you inherited a new project, et cetera, you can now immediately start talking to the most up-to-date docs possible.
Yeah. Plus, there's additional, like, you don't even have to be starting from scratch like you are here, right? Because you're asking about the installation. If you're a new person entering a already working project, what you might need instead is an explanation. Like, what does this file do? What does this piece of code do? Where do I find a reference to that, etc.? Some developers leave notes in the comments, which is awesome. You're awesome people, but not everyone does that, right? And if you have that knowledge base somewhere on the side, and you have that already scraped and added to the context of an LLM, that's amazing because digging through documentation, I mean, there's probably a reason why not many people enjoy doing that, although we could argue it's important to read through the documentation, but it's not effective, right? If you have a deadline, you need to get things done. You need to get to the critical piece of information as fast as possible, and AI assistants are kind of great at that. They're better than Google search because you get the answer directly instead of trying to go 3 issues of Stack Overflow, 15 doc pages, and 3 failed attempts.
Absolutely. But I also think that your mileage here will vary, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
my locally hosted LLM probably isn't performing as good as you know, if I was using something publicly hosted or if I was using a more powerful LLM here, I probably could have also added additional context, right, to follow the instructions in TXT file more than whatever knowledge base is already built in. But this is a great start, right? We already know about things like NPX checkly login, right?
Yep.
NPX checkly test. All of this was missing before, right? None of this was referenced. And all it took was less than 5 minutes of running a script.
Yep.
Uh, but yeah, so let me switch back to the deck real fast and let's keep going because, like you said, we're short on time. We can talk
Yep.
about next steps some other time. Again, this whole slide deck will be available as a resource in the future. But yeah, Philip, I'm super curious about what you have for us today.
Yeah, so we'll be taking a look at uh, workflow automation. So the goal is to automate some of the daily workflows. As we mentioned in the beginning, Playwright is a great tool not only for testing, but for various types of automations. And this webinar is all about like stepping outside of testing for a little bit, because we know Playwright is great at testing, but it can be great at other things as well. So in the same manner as you would try to automate a smart home, where your lights automatically light up when you get into a room or stuff like that, I'm thinking we can do smart automations. And that can be different kind of things like gathering information, automating tasks, working more efficiently. And I really love these kind of things. I kind of love automation. I'm using stuff like Keyboard Maestro. I'm using Raycast, and I've been always fan of these tools that can just like at a hit of a button get you to where you need. So that being said, we can go to the next slide. We'll
You
be
got it.
talking code, right? let's let's go. So let me share my screen real
Absolutely.
quick, and let me tell you a story. So this is a page. People in Slovakia and Czech Republic might know this page if they were ever trying to buy a car. So you teased a little bit that, yeah, maybe I'll buy a car today. It's probably not going to happen, but because, I wanted to buy new car 2 years ago, then I said I'm going to buy it last year and I didn't do that. And this year I'm saying I'm definitely buying a car this year. We'll see what happens. Maybe it's going to happen next year. But um, it seems like it's time for a new automobile for our family. And buying a car is a hassle. There are thousands of listings. It's really hard to navigate, and you have to dedicate some time every day to look at what's new, then pick up the phone, etc. There's a lot. So what I'm looking at now is a page for buying used cars. So what I would do every morning while I'm getting my coffee is I will take a look at a car. I'll first pick a brand. Volvo is the thing I want, because I care about safety. That's all I care about with my big family. And we're looking at XC90 because it's a car that can fit my whole family. I have a big family. I have 4 kids, so we need a seven seater. So when I click here, by the way, it's all in Slovak, so you probably don't understand. But this is the big button that shows you the results. And when I look at the results, I obviously have so many results to pick from, and I can narrow down my search. And there is a way to get like an email notification. Where is it? Yeah, I can get an email notification if there's a interesting listing added to the site. But the problem is for some reason when I go to this first page, I cannot find a place where I could like list all of the 7-seaters, because Volvo XC90 is actually like 5-seater and a 7-seater, and I'm only looking for those 7-seater models. So I need to filter it out over here somewhere. Where is it? Here we go. And now I get my results. So that's a lot of hassle, right?
So painful, so painful.
That's too much. That's too much. So how about we automate that, right? That's the answer. Let's go. So here's my automation script. Here's something I've created to make my life a little bit easier. Pretty much it's doing what I have just shown. I go to the page, I'll pick my brand, I click confirm the brand, I confirm the type of the car, then I set the price, I set the kilometers, etc. And then when I get to my results, what I'll do is maybe a little bit of a janky way to do that, but what I'm going to do is collect all of the cars from the search page and select all of the price elements and the model, link to that car, and a photo, title photo of that car, and save it all to a file called cars.json. So let's go to the fun part and actually run this. And we've been joking around with Jonathan to see if this actually runs, because I've been fixing that script for a while. And it seems to be running. Yeah, okay, it looks good. Looks so far so good. It's doing everything it should. We have a success. Amazing. This wasn't pre-recorded, which is cool. I seriously thought about doing that. Anyways, now we have the list of the cars. If I look into my cars JSON, I can see all of the listings, I can see all of the links, and now I can do something with it, right? I also have it in here, so that's sweet. So I can do something with that, right? And I have various different options of how I can work with this file a little further. I can send it to a Discord via webhook or through Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever tool I might be using. Or I can just send all of these results to my email, or I can, try to diff and only list the new cars. The options are pretty much endless. But since we are at a Checkly webinar, there's a really cool thing of what we can do utilizing Checkly. Because in any case, what I want to do with this script is I want to run it not on a loop, but I want to run it periodically, let's say every 24 hours. So I get all of the new ones and read them in the morning while I get my coffee. So let's try and go ahead and do that. So we've been looking at the documentation. I don't have documentation scraped into my local AI model, but I have you, Jonathan. So you can be my documentation. But if I remember correctly, what we should be doing as a first step is to do npm create checkly. So this is going to hold our hand and let us initialize. Let us do the first step of initializing the project. So we are already in a project. So let's initialize that. Let's copy everything we need. I think if I just do the enter key over and over, I pretty much would get to the goal. So .eu, I made a typo, and I'd like to install dependencies. Looks like I have a Playwright config file, so Checkly is curious about that. Everything is copied, everything works. All right. So now in my project, I have some new stuff. I have Checkly config, I have my checks. So these are demo files, right, that were added by this script. But what I want to do, as I mentioned, I want to run my Playwright script and to pretty much like download the information or get the information that I want. So what I can do is I'll just drag and drop my test into this checks folder, and now my test has become a check. Of course, we need to do a little bit more adjusting. It's not just like that, but we're pretty much halfway there. So in principle, I can just use this file, right, and run it using Checkly's infrastructure. In order to do that, I think I can delete all of these files, right? I don't need those. Mm-hmm. But what I will need is a file called browser checks.ts.
Oh, it's dot check.
Dot check. Dot check. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no trouble.
You just saved me an hour of debugging. And I'll paste in the configuration. We'll get to this in a minute. Right, so here's the basic configuration of what I want to do. The important thing that I would highlight here is the frequency with which we want to run this check. So this frequency is now set to every 24 hours. So, and we have some locations, run parallel, we don't really need that, and autocomplete is trying to correct me on everything, so I don't need to do that. Browser check number 18. I don't know why it's number 18. I guess.
Yeah, you can name it whatever you like.
Check cars. All right. Okay, and now we're ready, right? I guess.
That's it.
Now we do what will we do? Help me, Jonathan. I'll
do NPX Checkly. Yeah, you can do NPX Checkly test.
Checkly test. Let's go. So let's just try it without the record first, just to see if everything works. Parsing project, and we're running. So now we're kind of doing the same thing as I did before when I did npx playwright test, right? We're running that script, we're running that locally. We're not yet utilizing. Oh, wait, we are.
You are. Yeah.
Oh, I am. Okay. I'm just
Yeah.
like doing a dry run right now.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
So now you're using checklist infrastructure in EU West 1 to run the check, right?
Awesome. All right. And it passed, which makes me so happy. All right. So now when I do the other thing and I do the npx checklist test and do dash dash record, given that I'm logged in, which it seems I am because we had a dry run before, uh, now if I go to checklist page, I should see this somewhere, right? Where should I see that?
Yeah, there you go. Test sessions.
Test sessions. Oh, here we go. Undefined, running. That's the one. So we are running now, and I'm checking my cars. Sweet. That's all I had to do in order to run this, right? And since my check is now set up, I'll probably have to git push, right, and publish the branch. Um, but yeah, everything is pretty much set up for this check to run every 24 hours and give me the information I need. Now, while we wait for this to finish, I wanted to point out one thing because I sort of skipped over that, right? And that's this configuration, browser check. Now, you usually find that in the documentation. So if you already have your AI fed with the documentation, it'll probably come up with the solution. But using this checklist dashboard, I can create a new browser check from here, right? I can click this plus button, create a new browser check. I can start from scratch, and here I can define my Playwright script. And once I have that and create my new check, I can export to code, and I have that same thing available here in my code. So this is where you would find like the default settings for that browser check, and sort of get an idea of what you need to have set up and how it should look like. All right, let me go back to that check. I'm curious whether it passed. It has passed. We got 24 seconds, everything ran, and we can take a look at our log. Where is that? Where's
You
all of
talk
the
about the trace? It's
yeah, trace.
right,
Actually
right
no, like the
there.
console log. Yeah, job log. That's
Oh,
that's
there
the
you
one
go.
I was looking for. Because here, at the end of a script, I print out all of that information. Right? I create the cars.json, but I also print it out to the console. So now, since we have time limitations on this webinar, we're not going to take another step. But this is where we can like really take off, right? We have all that data, we have it nicely structured through that Playwright scrape, and now we can send a notification, send it to Slack, send an email, do whatever we need. So yeah, I think that's pretty sweet. I didn't automate the buy button today because I didn't want to spend a lot of money, you know.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the really cool thing too about what you just showed is that, while you're looking at this website, maybe trying to buy a car, um, I think you could also use this to, maybe monitor status pages, right? If a status page subscription is only via email, but hey, I really want the update of whether or not something's gone horribly wrong in some service I rely on to go straight to Slack or straight to Discord. You have the ability to use Playwright for that, right?
Yeah.
And you likely could also do that using, maybe like a multi-step check or an API check versus a browser check. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else here as far as other use cases you think would be really cool to adopt in this sort of manner, Philip?
I mean, what you said just reminded me of situations we had when I was working back in Slido. It was a live event application, so if anything didn't work, people would get really upset because you have a live event going on, and something doesn't work. But sometimes it wasn't our fault, right? Sometimes there was an integration that wasn't working, but there was still a lot of time between us figuring out that there's something wrong and the first client reaching out to us. So these kind of automations, if are set up really well, can give you a heads up of like, hey, this is happening. Watch out, brace yourselves, because it's going to get rough.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. Let me drop this real fast. Uh, okay, let's bring this back up. Thank you, Philip, for walking through that. I appreciate you. I really wanted you to buy a car, but you didn't, so I'm disappointed. We'll talk about this on Discord later. Um, so the last thing that we'll show today, and actually we're doing pretty good on time, so I'm proud of us, is validation engineering, right? So validation engineering, what the heck? Code, and then we'll talk about some next steps, right? So at a high level, I think it's really important that our community at large really tries to understand validation engineering. If it's not a practice you're already familiar with, right? And I really like positing it this way. We have monitoring on one side, right? We have testing on another side. Most of the time, these two don't really intersect. Um, but validation engineering is this really interesting space where essentially people are making sure that systems, processes, and products meet predefined requirements and quality standards, which to some folks, with a more QA background, will just say like, oh yeah, that's QA, right? But validation engineering is this sort of superset of both monitoring and testing, where it's not just about assuring quality up to a certain point, right? It's up to and through. It's making sure that in real life, sorry to put it that way, in real life, things are working the way that you expect. Philip, you have some thoughts here?
I think this is a really great way to put it. Although I think like many QA engineers are, I'm hoping, aware of that, right? Because our customers don't care about how fancy our test automation suite is, right? They care about whether the product is working or not. They're the ones that carry the impact of non-functioning application. So the idea of like testing in production and monitoring production, that's been thrown around for years now, but I feel like this really drives the point home where like, yeah, you should periodically check whether everything is working in production. I mean, I remember that at some point, like after every release, we would do a set of manual steps in production as well, but at some point we were like, yeah, it's probably working. So you can grow out of the habit of focusing on the most important thing.
Absolutely. And I think a practice that maybe we're all familiar with, or at least we've heard of quite a few different times, is the concept of canary deployments, right? And
Yep.
this can mean quite a few different things. I think sometimes people say canary deployments and they mean, okay, we're rolling out changes across different data centers that are already in production. Some people can say it and mean, hey, that means when things are going to production, we actually move through staging, then UAT1, then UAT2, then 3, then we're for real in production, and that's our canary deployment, right? So there's so many different ways of looking at this. But I do think that canary deployments really, to some degrees, really typifies this sort of validation engineering approach, right? Um, Go
Yeah,
for it.
it's also when you mention stuff like that, that sounds really cool. But I'm also thinking like how many companies actually go through the lengths of setting up something like that? Because it's like really difficult, right? And of course, as I said, like you can sometimes grow out of the habit of checking your production manually because it's boring. You don't want to do manual work. You'd like to automate stuff, right? So there is like it's sort of hanging in the air like, yeah, we want to do something that will make our releases safe, but how do we do that? How do we automate the hell out of it so we don't have to do it manually every time?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. I think, over the course of the last 7 months or so, I did quite a bit of research with users within our community. And what people were saying time and time again was that when there was an incident in production, 70% of the time was a stat I kept getting, right? Like it's because of bad code reaching production.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, right? And that, hey, when we go down, it's mostly because something we've done is actually wrong versus a true infrastructure based incident, right? Then what does that mean? That means that you should be doing things like, super quick validations after you push to production. That does mean that you should be doing things like, implementing automatic rollbacks or resets, et cetera. Um, it makes a very strong case for adopting validation engineering as a practice. Philip, anything else before we actually look at some
Uh,
code?
Nothing in particular comes to mind. So
Awesome.
Neo knows not only jujitsu but how to code. So let's take a look.
Let's take a look. Yeah. 1 second. Let's pull this up, make sure I'm in the right thing. And I am. Right. So to some degree, I wanted to take a moment and say, so we're kind of putting it all together at this point, right? This directory is empty, but now we know we could set up external monitoring using Playwright, right? We could set up a knowledge base using Playwright. And then all of a sudden, in this, you know, monolithic approach, all of these resources are just available to our entire team, right? And we're that much more strong for it. And of course, the last thing that we're looking at here is this validation engineering use case. And something you did earlier, and I remember you pointing this out as like a pretty powerful thing, was, hey, I have this test. And if I move this test to another directory, it's now a synthetic monitor.
Yep.
In this case, right, I'm leaving it exactly where it is. But this test that logs in, I'm leaving it as a test because I need this to run locally. I need this to run in CI/CD. This test is also pointed at every preview deployment that I have because this is a Vercel based full stack project, right? And so the only thing that I'm doing here, and again, I always do things this sort of like most efficient lowbrow way until I need to do something more advanced and more mature, is I'm using this sort of default file. That way I don't have to juggle multiple configs and multiple projects within Playwright, et cetera. Because for production and staging, I just want to choose between these two as I run against preview deployments, as I run against staging, or if I'm in production, right? And of course, I have different users depending on the environments that I'm running in. And so in this way, again, using Checkly, because we're still using browser checks, et cetera, all of a sudden, the only thing that's really changed, because that test looks like any other test I could have written, right? You already talked about how to create browser checks and then just reference already existing tests that exist. The only thing that really changes here is now I have this really cool way of saying, hey, you're running and staging. Let's npx checkly test and then pass that record flag. And if that fails, we're going to do immediate rollback, right? If I can't log in, if I can't visit after I push some code to an environment I care about, I'd rather revert and then look at what's going on versus keep that live in production to cause me an issue that I care about, right?
Yeah, and try to revert that manually.
Yeah,
I've seen
exactly.
a similar thing being done, but it's in a way I think like more complicated, right? Where you sort of tag your tests into different groups, right? And you do a little smoke tag, and then you run that set of tests after you do the deployment, right?
Yeah.
But that comes at its own cost. Plus, like if it's part of a pipeline that is, maybe flaky or whatever, then you might run into like real sets of issues. Whereas this, you don't really have to tag anything, right? You just like run a subset of tests that you feel like should be dedicated to or should be able to run in production. And if anything goes wrong, you can just revert. Are you going to run that?
Yeah, I'm going to run it.
Oh, sweet.
Then we're just going to cross our fingers because I haven't run this in a while. but, I think,
Live
again,
debugging.
Yeah, exactly. We might have to debug it a little bit. But I think the powerful thing here again is, hey, at the end of the day, if something was going wrong in production right now, right? Someone was failing to log in and I was able to maybe there wasn't bad code. Maybe the check hadn't been updated, right? Maybe the test hadn't been updated. All of a sudden, sorry, let me switch to my actual account. All of a sudden, right? Like I can get quick confirmation and artifacts I can share with my team around, hey, I've implemented some change. The check is passing now. Everything's working as it should. And then, of course, I have that really great Playwright trace available to dive in further if I choose to. Right. So again, just to kind of walk us back through what we've seen, because we did this in 50 minutes, Philip. So I'm shocked, to be honest.
We'll have
Um,
time for Q&A.
yeah,
Uh,
we'll
Also,
have time
one thing
for it.
that I like to point out, if you go back to the Checkly dashboard,
You got it.
so this is a passing test, and we have like a full trace view that Playwright has generated. If we imagine that this was a failing test, this would be a great way, even if you like don't have that automatic revert setup,
Yeah,
this would be an absolutely amazing way of seeing what actually went wrong. And you get that visuals too, right? So
yeah,
if that tests, how end-to-end tests are, they fail with this obscure errors like, hey, timed out because I couldn't find an element. But like, why? What happened? Like, what were you trying to do? You need a context, right?
yeah.
And traces are great in that. Like, they provide you with the necessary context, and you also have the visuals that will add even more information. And if anything is not working in your production, you're like just seconds away from finding out what's going on.
Yeah. So exactly that, right? But I think again, just to kind of highlight where we're at now, and maybe some next steps for me are, you know, implementing external monitoring in this solution. That way people can have a pattern for that. So thank you, Philip, for walking through that AI, that automation use case with buying a car, because it's an inspiration, I think, right? Being able to generate a knowledge base that, hey, your own developers all of a sudden have internal docs and it took you moments to really look at the docs for the solutions that you care about, and then have that as something you can reference, as something AI can reference, et cetera. And then, of course, again, all we're really doing is adding some very mild additional logic. And then all of a sudden, we can run those same tests as validation steps as we make our way to production. So I think we're good to do some Q&A. So let's do that.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of questions incoming. I think, yeah, the first one maybe we could answer from Richard. Thank you for the question. Is there a chance Checkly will integrate with Cypress at some point?
Yeah, this is a great question. Richard, I was typing a response before it was my turn to present again, and I think this is something that has actually come up a few times. Um, what I will ask you to do is join the Checkly community Slack, ask this question. I'll tag Tim Nolet, who's our our OG founder, and I'll say, because it comes up, and I think it could actually be quite powerful. I would happy to learn more about your use case as well. But yeah, let's keep it rolling.
All right, we got Sebastian asking, what is the best configuration for Checkly? And I feel like this is also going to be an answer with a reference. Yeah, npx checkly test record doesn't do anything. Unable to run checks. Account has insufficient checks remaining. I guess that ties to trial, maybe?
Yeah, exactly that. I think, what you should do here is go to your Checkly account or just look up again, Checkly, NPX Checkly, who am I? Make sure that it's tied to an account that still actively has credits. We have a pretty we have a pretty great hobby plan and a good free trial for you to check out what you're looking for there. Also, hi Sebastian, good to see you. Um, I think, you know, if you want an extended trial, just let me know and I'll enable you there. But likely you're just out of credits right now. Um,
All right. We got a couple of more, and by the way, if you feel like asking a question, feel free to do so. So let's go with the next one from Jose, I guess. Hopefully pronouncing your name right. Hello, is the agent capable of performing mathematical calculations such as sums, averages, and modes to obtain better assertions, and also handle questions like, can you recommend which car should I buy based on my budget? Or should a new file be created specifically for handling these types of questions and storing the results? The way I would approach that, I think, is I would add it to, and this would be a step in the flow, right? So I've done the first step. I scraped the data I was interested in, and I gave it a structure. And if there was a point at which I would like to ask that question, so let's say I have 80 or I have hundreds of results, then I would probably work with the resulting file, with that nicely structured file, and try to ask the LLM, like, hey, this is my budget. What do you think? Which cars should I check out? It's actually a really interesting use case. So thank you for pointing that out. Cause yeah, I'm just looking for new ones to appear. Cause if I'm very specific with my needs, not a lot of not a lot of cars are going to show up. But if you're a little bit more loose and maybe want a little bit more advice, I think that would be really cool. Now with the calculations, I'm not sure like which model currently or which like which model is good at doing math. I'm assuming Claude should be pretty good, but I haven't I haven't had the need for that too often. So I don't know about what would be like the best approach. Any ideas here, Jonathan?
this is I love this because it sounds like Jose is creating an app right now, right? Like his own SaaS app because there's a few. I mean, you're generating that JSON already, right? And you're logging it. There's nothing that keeps you from putting that into another file and then talking with a locally hosted LLM and saying, providing the context of what your budget is and finding out, hey, can you flag any of these cars as a good deal? I think the interesting thing here, right, as with all things between the space of AI and our own logic that we can create, is what keeps you from just, you know, having your own this is a good deal litmus, right? Do you need AI to tell you that something's a good deal? I think determining, you know, what what logic you're responsible for versus what logic you want to offload to AI is the thing that we're constantly navigating now. But this is a great question, Jose.
Yeah, the architectural decision. You actually reminded me because you said like Jose is maybe building a product. And it actually reminded me of a product of a friend of mine. They have a web where they're trying to do kind of a similar thing, but with apartments. And not only like there's a scraping process, but there's like a data validation process, right? Because the scraping in of itself, like it needs to be it needs to be able to handle errors. So you don't want to stop the process just because you couldn't find a piece of information, right? If I don't know, like the price is not in euros but it's in dollars or something like that. But then you have a missing field in your data, and can you scrape that? So maybe you need a validation step, and maybe you need to like cross-reference with different sites and try to find that missing piece of information. Um, so I think like one of the key parts of getting a really good answer to a question like that might be to have a really good data set ready. But I don't know like too many details of how that product actually looks. But to me, it feels like the data gathering might be also an interesting step to like really tackle and to really get well.
Yeah. Let's hit these last two, and then I think we'll actually end on time, which is nuts. So Richard had a follow-up, right? He said, what
Yep.
limitations are there on checkly tests? Could you run a whole test suite on a periodic basis? And the answer to that question is absolutely. You can run a whole test suite on a periodic basis if that's your approach. Like, let's say you really wanted to have your checks or your tests for your UAT or staging environment constantly running. That way, you know, hey, UAT is not healthy right now. We shouldn't push anything to it until someone clears the database, et cetera. You could absolutely do that. As far as limitations right now, what I will say is that we're actively working on something called a Playwright check. So not a browser check, not a multi-step check, but a Playwright check where you can run Playwright however it is you run Playwright, right? We'll be the first synthetic monitoring company to offer this. This is something that our really great team, led by Maria and Umut over in the EU, are driving today. So super cool. And I would say right now, as a limitation, we give you dependencies you can run your checks with. But again, in the very near future, that'll be a thing of the past, which is nuts. Um,
That sounds
I
amazing.
I saved the best for last because I love when people bring up, yeah, it is actually super cool. I love when people bring up page object models, right? I don't know if Sunil was taking some like very small shots at my code, right? He's like, this code looks simple. Um,
Yeah, full
I
disclaimer, this is just for demo purposes. We're
yeah,
we're much better coders than this, yeah.
speak for yourself. But Sunil, I think that page object models for at least me are a pretty charged topic, right? Because man, I'm going to go into it right now. So here's the situation, right? If QA folks are disappearing, test engineers are disappearing, SREs are disappearing, platform engineers are disappearing. That means that developers are more and more responsible for owning more and more of the code base, testing and monitoring, synthetic monitoring included. If that's the case, right? And I think about some of the implementations for page object models I've seen, which are like super mature and robust and have an entire team of QA test engineers behind them. If you don't have that engine to keep that thing alive and to keep that, how can I say, efficient and maintained, is the page object model as practical as just writing a test using a modern framework could be, right? Like Playwright, or even Cypress for that matter. Super English-like syntax, easy to read, easy to understand. Obviously, you're going to have to make some abstractions here and there, but this is sort of my take, and I always kind of lean away from the page object model when I can. Not to say there's anything wrong with it. You can use it. You can use it with Checkly. Playwright fully supports it, obviously. Filip, I opened a whole door here right at the end, as I said we finish on time. What are your thoughts before we wrap for the
Yeah,
day?
I think like there's a certain value of abstraction, and we all understand that, right? The reason why we abstract things is that we don't want to rewrite things over and over. But there's a thing that gets less talked about, and that's cost of abstraction, right? And as you work with like larger and larger code bases, you might be able to see that more and more. Let's say you write an abstraction that is now being used in 30 different tests or hundreds of different tests. The cost of changing that is actually like becoming bigger, right? Because maybe you're changing abstraction because one of those tests is flaky or something needs to be changed for purpose of a new test, newly added test, or for the purpose of one test that is acting out. But what you might unintentionally be doing is affecting multiple different tests. So the dependability goes both ways, and you really need to think about that because there's value, but there's also cost. So careful about those abstractions, and for demo applications or for demos like these, You want to make sure everything is visible. I don't want to be clicking through 3 different files.
Awesome. Philip, as always, such a pleasure to work with you on this.
Same here.
Thanks for pitching in. I'm super excited to see, what the feedback is from the community afterwards. Yeah, let's call it a day and let's connect later.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Jonathan, and bye everyone.
Bye.